Welcome to the Unconventional Path, Entrepreneurship and Innovation Stories and Ideas. Hi, I'm bela.and.mike.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Today's guest on the podcast is David Dussault. He is the founder of P-1 Industries in Schenectady, New York. This is part two of my conversation with David. David started P-1 after leaving General Electric and has built a solid business in machining and fabricating precision metal components for the energy and defense industries. David and I had a great conversation on how he keeps his eye focused on customer service and building a great culture within the company. This is a great example of applying entrepreneurial skills to a traditional manufacturing process. This was a long conversation I had with Mike, so we broke it into two parts. This is part two.
You can find part one in episode 156.
You can check it out there.
Great. Bela, I'm excited to hear the conclusion. So let's get right to part two of your interview with David Dussault.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about labor and hiring folks. I just did another episode of the podcast where the guest I talked to, we talked about the value of apprenticeships.
Yeah.
And how, most of the world thinks about apprenticeships for the trades, a plumber or an electrician. But even in if you're a doctor, a medical residency is basically an apprenticeship.
That's right.
We don't call it that, but it's an apprenticeship. The first 5 years of my engineering career was fundamentally an apprenticeship. I learned how to do all the things they didn't teach me at school.
That's right. Yeah.
So how is the labor situation? Because you hire a lot of skilled workers.
We do.
And how does that work? How has that worked for you?
Yeah, so you're exactly right. Labor shortages is the biggest problem that we face as an organization, with regard to, I started the company 16, 17 years ago. I'll pick on a machinist for a second. We have a lot of trades. We have engineers, supply chain people, logistics, fabricators, welders, engineer, all those kind of things. But machinists are really, really in particular, they're in low supply, they're high demand, they're highly, highly skilled, right? As a machinist, a machinist is not, I hate the term blue collar. They're not a blue collar person. They're a software programmer. They're a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer. They're a quality control individual. They're a maintenance technician. They're kind of this hybrid, person that can make physical products from code and physical metal, in an environment where it has to be temperature controlled. They're using coolants. They're hitting dimensions to the fourth and fifth place decimal. I mean, it is. And you change a temperature on aluminum piece, it's going to change how it dynamically, impacts with the cutter you're using. I mean, it is engineering. Like these are very, very highly skilled people. They're not pushing buttons. Okay. And we have a very young workforce. So our average age, we have like 45 machinists on staff. And the average age is 29 years old. And the reason that is because if you find a seasoned machinist in the workplace, they're employed. And they've probably been at that employee for 10 years. And they're making really, really good money. They have incredible amount of benefits because they're highly skilled. So what we had to do is we had to go into the high schools, and we built a program called Pathways. And our Pathways program is we'll go identify those kids that don't necessarily want to go to four-year schools, but they want a highly valued career, and we'll bring them in as interns. So we hire 5 Pathways interns every quarter. So we hire 20 a year. We get them out of high schools, we get them out of the trade schools, we get them out of BOCES, we get them out of Hudson Valley Community College, and we'll plug them into a 3-month program. And then during that 3 months, they're going to do 5 or 6 different things. They're going to empty chip bins. They're going to do quality control. They're going to move carts around. We're going to give them kind of an exposure to everything. And what we're really looking for is versatility, adaptability, and work ethic, right? Are they willing to work hard and learn and grow in that situation? And if we find the right people, so the last class of 5, we hired 2 full-time, and now we're sending them to Hudson Valley Community College. We pay for their tuition. They're going for the advanced manufacturing and machining degree. It's a 2-year program. It's a 4-year program at night. We employ them full-time. We pay for it. They get a good starting wage. And then they apprentice inside of our shop. So we're actually registered with the Department of Labor. We actually have a physical journeyman certificate apprenticeship program. They got to do 8,000 hours in addition to their education. That's how we built our workforce. Like we have 45 machinists today. We put every single one of them, with the exception of like 3 or 4, through that same program. And we've done that very, very successfully. Now, we also have a vision and a strategy of, one of the things, 2019, 2020, we started looking at how do we grow our business from, at that time, 17, 18 million to 50 million. And what's the biggest constraints? Not sales. We can sell. right? We build good relationships. We can execute and do all those kind of things. Equipment you can buy, right? Buying equipment's easy. Call the bank, get a loan,
Right.
get in the shop. I mean, it's expensive, but we never had a problem buying equipment. It's really finding the people to run equipment. So we did some analysis, and we discovered that there's 16,000 machining companies in the United States, 864 in New York State alone, that have 20 or less employees, and generally they have about 8. That's kind of our sweet spot. It's 8 people. They're all machinists. They all have equipment, factories, whether it's a garage or not, and they're highly competent. So we've actually started developing and cultivating, we got 14 of these shops working with very intrinsically today. And we're actually leveraging their people, their expertise, their equipment. We treat it as our own capacity. So we don't have to hire them. We don't have to train them, but we're utilizing their capacity and their expertise, and we treat it like our own. So we always say to people, they say, how many employees you have? We're like, we got 104 inside the 4 walls of our 3 factories, but we really have 320.
Yeah.
Right. Because of all these shops we're working with.
Yeah. As you're saying that, David, remind me of that's a very popular concept in Japan. I don't know what they call it. There's a name for it because I remember from my IBM days when I did a lot of business in Japan, even though the company only had 100 people in it, right? They had this whole network of, another 10, 15 companies out there that were, I won't say captive suppliers, but they were close to it. Right.
Yeah, I say partners. They're partners.
Yes, partners is a much better word. Yeah.
Yeah, we have the same thing. We have painstakingly developed and cultivated, and we target really small shops, right? We want to, part of our vision to revitalize American manufacturing. Well, part of that is not just hiring people inside of our 4 walls, but helping these small shops in, these small little towns in America, giving them, they don't have salespeople. They don't have a 5-person sales and marketing force. They don't have an engineering team like we do. So we'll go out and we'll hunt for the work. We'll develop the relationships. And if we think we can buy a product in a high quality capacity, now we still put our name on it. We'll bring it in. We'll inspect it, package and ship it. But yeah, absolutely. We believe that we can fill those small shops as well. And leverage, because they have people that, even if they have 8 machinists, that's 8 machinists I don't have to hire and train in the future. We're still trying to do that, but they're already locked in. They've already got certain capabilities. And you know how fast we can test it? We can give them a test product. If they make it, they hit the specs and everything else, that's pretty good. Yeah. So yeah, our vision, that's part of our scaling story is, and we built a whole software platform for it. We're using software to manage that supply base, send quotes out, do a bunch of different things to manage this decentralized supply chain. And that's our growth story. That's where we're going with it. Yeah.
It's interesting talking about these apprenticeship programs, just for another minute. I can remember when I started at GE in 1975 at a grad school, they had an apprenticeship program for tool makers. Because, I was a mechanical engineer. I had a lot of stuff made, and the guys that were making it, some of them were apprentices. And so it was a 2-year program. And it was interesting. In those days, they not only did they have an apprentice program for tool makers and machinists, die makers, et cetera, they also had one for people in finance and people in leadership, right? So they had these multiple levels or tiers or types of apprenticeship. They didn't call them apprenticeship programs, but they were fundamentally what they were for training the workforce at all different levels. Yeah. And it's interesting how in many ways, we've gotten away from that in this country, right? We've sort of drifted away from that into this real bifurcation of jobs, into the super entry level. You're making minimum wage, $15 an hour, to people making well into 6 figures. Yeah. And that the middle has sort of gone away.
Yeah.
Why do you think, like, particularly in the manufacturing sector, we used to own manufacturing in the world, right? The United States was one of, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, one of the best manufacturing places in the world. What happened? How did all that stuff vanish?
Yeah, this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I could go on about this for 6 hours. I won't, but look, if you go back, I think 1976 was the last year we had a positive trade balance in the United States.
Right.
What that fundamentally means is you're shipping or exporting more than you're buying or importing. And in the 1980s, the whole low-cost country thing really became popular, right? There, hey, I can go into China, I can go into India, I can go to other parts of the world, and my direct cost I can bring down, by some multiple, not by 10% or 20%. I can bring it down a multiple of 2 to 3 times versus what I'm paying in the United States. And I think part of the whole notion of short-termism around, Wall Street and 3-month earning calls and all that kind of stuff really drives a lot of that short-term thinking. And again, at that time, in the short term, it was probably a high impact to margins, cash flows, all these other things. But I think the things that people don't talk about that was truly lost during that era. And I'm not going to pick on companies. I could throw a couple of companies out that had a huge push into that world where, everything was offshored. They called it the low cost country initiative. But they lost their ability to develop new products and bring things rapidly to market and iterate and do research and development in a very highly effective way. We lost that manufacturing base as a result of those things. And you're seeing a lot of companies that once dominated 30, 40 years ago, that are not dominating anymore. And I believe, again, I'm a little bit biased, but when I read McKinsey reports on it, that study the companies that had a high, low cost country initiative versus that had low, they may have outperformed in the short term, but in the long term, they lost their edge in terms of product development, innovation, marketing,
That's right.
all the things that they do. And, so I think that it was short-termism. And what's interesting is I read a recent book. I won't.
Well, let me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
Let me add one point to that. A lot of those companies that were manufacturing those products for those American companies in low-cost parts of the world are now really big companies that own that market.
That own that market, and the whole tech transfer.
Right.
I worked on teams in the past that did business with China, and there's tech transfer. And, I often heard the excuse, well, we're giving them old technology. Yeah, well, you're giving them like a 40-year head start from where we had to start from.
That's right. That's
right. And then all of a sudden now, the middle class emerges in those countries. They're making a lot more money. Prices start going up. Then there's a pandemic and geopolitical interconnections and logistic change, supply chain stop. And all of a sudden now you start looking at supply chain a little bit differently, saying, hey, there's a direct cost component. There's a quality component. I'm sure a lot of those companies in the low cost country became high quality producers, but now there's a interruption component. There's a risk component related to geopolitical issues. There's a war in Ukraine. There's a pandemic that shuts down, a good part of China. We see what happens with inflation, with cost of goods, with lead times and all the other stuff. And I think the pandemic exposed our lack of readiness as a U.S. We couldn't even manufacture basic PPE for hospitals, because we couldn't get raw materials or the products from overseas because of all the interconnected. And I think that exposed a lot of weaknesses, because I agree with you. I graduated what's called the Operations Management Leadership Training Program in 2002, which fundamentally was an apprenticeship for, operational leadership with supply chain and manufacturing. And that's kind of what got me into that world. A lot of companies aren't investing in those things anymore because that's a long-term investment. Well, you need short-term results. Right. So let's go buy companies, let's offshore manufacturing, let's do all these other things. But I think we're starting to see a kind of a big shift because people are realizing, with technology and productivity. So the United States, I don't know the exact data point. This is close enough just to get the point across. Our productivity is like 100 times that of China's because of technology and process improvements we've made over the last 100 years. Okay. So that means that we can fundamentally produce a product with 1/100th of the labor input that China can. I don't know if that's purely accurate. It's in that range. It's pretty high. It's a pretty high offset, which is quite interesting. So technology integration into manufacturing, coupled with geopolitical risk and other issues overseas, coupled with being able to quickly invert in an adaptable way, turn products around very, very quickly, not to mention inventory holding strategies, filling up containers with a ton of product that by the time it gets here, it's obsolete with rev controls because customers change things. All of those factors are becoming part of the discussion around manufacturing supply chain. I'm going to venture to say this. Manufacturing added jobs in the last decade for the first time since the 1970s. And in aggregate in the United States. Slow down a little bit in the beginning of the pandemic. It's building up again. I think it's the greatest shortage of labor in the U.S. is in the manufacturing sector right now. I venture to say that the U.S. will become a prominent manufacturer once again in the next 30 years because of all those factors: our stability, our economy, our currency, our labor force, our quality, our infrastructure, our roads, our government. All those things built into one makes it a very, very viable manufacturing center once again. And I think it's got to be at the forefront of every politician, every strategy and everything else, because when you have a positive export balance versus import balance, right, your deficit as a country starts declining because you're making more money than you're spending.
That's right.
And you're creating jobs for the middle class and putting wealth back into the pockets of mainstream America, which I think is really important.
Yeah, well said. So is there a country someplace in the world that does this really well?
Well, geez, I mean, if you look at China, did it very well. I mean, if you want to look at a country, I mean, look what China. I always tell people this. I go, if you look at every emerging nation, right? They call it the BRIC nation back in the day. They said it was Brazil, what was it, Russia, India, and China, right? It was our Russia, I believe.
Yeah.
These nations, when they wanted to generate significant wealth and influence and power in the world, what's the first thing they started developing? They didn't go out and start developing software. They do those things. They didn't go out. They developed manufacturing.
Right.
India is the next frontier. Thailand, Vietnam, all these other places. They want manufacturing because they want to export goods. They want their nations to be wealthy. They want to put their middle class people to work. They want this whole group of people in the country that can't afford to go to four-year college, nor should they go to four-year college, to have trades where they can build careers and everything else around that. Who does it well? Those countries do it well. And I said, Germany's another one. I don't know the exact statistics around Germany, but Germany is a net exporter of manufactured goods.
And has been for many, many, many years.
Yes. And Germany, you never hear of Germany's deficits and they got issues just like any other nation in the world, but Germany is a manufacturing state. They're a manufacturing nation. They've done it very well. But I always tell people, they're like, oh, manufacturing is not that important. I go, then why is every country who wants to be powerful and rich and grow and everything else invest heavily into manufacturing?
It's the first thing they do. And you know what it does is I always think that manufacturing, and it's in the broadest sense, right? All of the skills that are necessary, not just the tool maker, but all of the skills, build tremendous amount of middle class wealth.
Yes, 100%.
Right. That's and that's what makes a nation strong.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think in many ways, for many reasons, that's what's been gutted out of the United States. Yeah. And I think we're starting to realize, jeepers, we need to fix that, and we're making inroads to that.
By the way, if you want to look at security too, I read a report a couple months ago. Again, I'm getting old. I can't remember all the data and statistics. Our military readiness from a manufacturing perspective, China's caught up. Like, matter of fact, I think if it came down to wartime and we had to, tool up manufacturing infrastructure in the United States to build aircraft carriers or airplanes, I think China can do it almost 7 times faster than we can. And you want to talk about military readiness. You want to talk the ability to, react to major catastrophes and other issues around the world. The pandemic was a great example. We couldn't make masks fast enough. We couldn't stay ahead of the curve on specific, products that were manufactured. And that, to me, is a disaster.
Yeah. Yeah. So Dave, you're what I describe, at least in my own head, as a seasoned entrepreneur, right? You've been at this for a while.
Yeah.
Not building a business and selling it in 3 years, but starting a business and building it into a solid, sustainable,
profitable, cash flow
profitable business. Yeah, just really good. So what are the top 2 or 3 lessons that you've learned from that?
Yeah, I'll tell you, the number one thing I've learned, and I learned it hard over the last couple of years in particular, was if you find out what you're really, and I used to be the guy, be like, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. I can make anything work. I can solve any problems. I can do anything I want to put my mind to, and all the other BS they teach you. I know that sounds terrible, but it's true. Are you there?
Yeah, I'm there.
Oh, sorry. So the number one lesson I learned is really understand the business that you're in and the sets of capabilities that you truly stand out with, right? So in the world of MBAs, in the world of entrepreneurship, they'll call that, what is your value proposition that truly is that you're superior at to your competition? And once you find that out, once you figure out what that is, and you want to dial deep into that, right? You want to double down on that. You want to stay in your lane. You want to keep your head down. You want to figure out, how do I take that and then make that as big as possible, as profitable as possible, without veering outside of my lanes? And I've done everything outside. Like, I'm the atypical entrepreneur that has made all the startup investments and gone outside of my primary business. And I have a CEO coach. He told me a couple weeks ago. He says, "Hey, catch me up on everything you invested in the last 4 or 5 years." And he says, "You're like 0 for 9 outside of P1." And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You're literally the worst investor I've ever met in my entire life." He goes, "Call me and tell me the stocks you're going to buy. I'm going to sell those stocks. I'm going to short them." But what I discovered when I put my head down, so last year I put my head down in the business. Like I said, you know what? We bought another business in Colorado. It didn't work out very, very well. I went outside of my lane. There was a whole set of capabilities that we did not have that I thought we had. I thought I could overcome it with sheer hard work and everything else. And last year, I said, you know what? I'm going to go back to my blueprint. When I built this $18 million company back from 06 to 16, we bought equipment, we invested in apprentices, we invested in sales and marketing, we made good products, we improved our capabilities, we invested in lean manufacturing. And Bela, last year, we grew our revenues, our output, by 25%, our gross margin by 65%, and our EBITDA by 151% in 1 year. Then I started looking at that. I'm like, oh my God, I live in Schenectady, New York, and our business produced millions and millions of dollars in net cash flow, which goes very, very far in Schenectady, New York, by the way. And not only that, I was able to give all my employees 13% raises last year because I said, I don't want you to have to be burdened by inflation. And I'm willing to share that with you and be able to do that because I want you to be able to afford gas and groceries and eggs. And all
Sure. Yeah.
But the number one thing I've learned is stay in your lane and do what you do better than anyone else that does it. And if you want, you can grow that. You can become as big as you want doing that, right? People are like, oh, but I want to become bigger and everything. Yeah. If I do contract manufacturing better than anyone else in my industry, I could buy 50 contract manufacturers and apply my system and our process and our focus and our sales and marketing. And that's what I learned. We make the most money when we stay focused, when we put our efforts into the capabilities that we've mastered that are better than our competition. That's the number one thing that I've learned. And number two, I think this is very cliched, but it's absolutely true. You cannot do things on your own. You have to have a team that's in full alignment, gets the strategy, understands the vision, understands exactly how they contribute to it, and that are well measured and well incentivized. And I think if you do those couple of things well, you can build anything.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. So as you look into your crystal, let me ask you a question. What do you do from an active perspective to maintain your own and the business's edge that it has in the marketplace?
I'm a huge reader. Like, I know that, people are going to give real sexy answers stuff. Look, I read a boatload. I consume 50 to 60 books annually. I love learning from other people's experiences, what they've done. And one of our values in our culture is learning. We're always willing to learn new things and try new things. And when it comes down to our capabilities, we all, again, we're a capabilities-driven manufacturing company. So everything we do, and people are included in our capabilities, their ability to produce product, their ability to, all these different things. So anything we do is about learning how to improve the capabilities that we currently manage. We want to add capabilities in the future, but how do we make them better and better and better and better? And that includes technology. I think the greatest thing that's happened, I know this sounds really terrible, but I'm going to say it anyway. The greatest thing that I think has happened in the last 6 months is people are realizing, like these companies, like I'll pick on Facebook, for example. It's a social media company, okay, where people do whatever they do online. It's an advertising business model. They don't produce anything, right? And some would argue, do they really create value, right? They probably create more issues than, yeah. Now, it's fine. It's good. There's nothing wrong with Instagram and Facebook and all these other things. But if you really want to make a difference in this world, and that's the big, cliche in Silicon Valley and these places, wouldn't you take the technology skills that you have and apply it to a model in manufacturing or in medical, something that truly produces something that makes an impact in this world, and use technology to make it better, faster, and cheaper, and to improve the competitiveness of this great nation? And, I believe that the greatest thing that's happened is there's this big exodus of these people being laid off in these big companies. And I read an article the other day in the Atlantic, and they were talking about how now these software programmers, these technologists are saying, you know what? I don't want to go to the big FANG companies anymore. I don't want the Silicon Valley lifestyle. I want to go live in Idaho and apply my technology skills to a manufacturing company or to a medical office or one of those things. Yeah. And I think that's where you're going to see an incredible amount of value over the next 20 years that's created in our GDP, is coming from technology applied to old industries. And we're, one thing we do to keep an edge, we're always willing to look at new technologies, always willing to look at new ways to do things and improve the capabilities that we have, new equipment, new people, new training mechanisms, software integration, 3D printing, all those kind of things. So we never sit still. People always tell me moss doesn't grow under our rock very much, and it doesn't, because we're always trying to do things.
Yeah. So as you look out into your crystal ball, what do you see for P1 in the next 5 years from now? What do you envision for P1?
Yeah. So I talked to you a little bit about our network strategy, our spindle strategy, where we're working with a lot of these small shops, right? So we're dialed into Schenectady, New York. So our vision is to 10x our EBITDA, right? EBITDA is earning before interest, tax, depreciation. Why is that important? Because the more EBITDA we create, the more equipment we can buy, the more people can hire, the more raises we can give, the more factories we can build, the more suppliers we can buy from. So everyone just says, oh, you have a financial target. No. It's a financial target, which facilitates our vision to revitalize American manufacturing, okay? And that to us is hiring, inspiring the next generation workforce. It's buying state-of-the-art equipment. It's investing in new technologies in manufacturing. It's making Schenectady and New York State and the United States a highly competitive region for manufacturing and taking those things back from the international countries. So what do I see in 5 years? I see us generating 30 million in EBITDA. I see us hiring in Schenectady another 400 to 500 people, machinists, engineers, supply chain people, assemblers, other technicians. And we're going to start seeing that. You might say, well, it took you so long to get to 110 people. Yes.
Right.
But now we've got the customers, we've got the scale, we've got all these other things to start hiring on a pretty aggressive basis. And I want to impact 1,000 jobs at these smaller shops around the country. That to me is part of our vision. We want to work with enough small shops to give them work, and we want to impact 1,000 jobs positively as part of our vision to revitalize American manufacturing. And I want to build more factories in Schenectady. Right now we have 3 factories in the city of Schenectady. I could see us maybe not in 5 years building another 30. General Electric was founded in Schenectady, New York in 1878. And they became the primary employer for industrial product lines in Schenectady. I could see us, I gave a speech at the chamber back in October, and I said for a city that's torn down factories for the last 50 years, we've built 3 factories in the last 10. And we're just getting started. I would love to build another 30 factories in the city of Schenectady, pull people from the farms, pull people from local community, put them to work making products for drones, airplanes, power plants, submarines, aircraft carriers. I want to make products in Schenectady like GE made products for us back in 50, 60 years ago.
Yeah.
And I want to impact 1,000 jobs at these small shops around the country.
Yeah. Well said, David. Hey, as always, I really enjoyed our conversation. You were a wonderful guest on the podcast. Thank you so much for doing it.
Yeah, thanks, Bela. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Bela, lots to unpack here. As always, David is a great guest and had some amazing and insightful points to make. Let's pull out the key lessons here. What did you find most important from your conversation with David?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. One is interruptions, whether it be COVID or supply chain, are going to happen.
Wars. Yep.
Wars, right? We don't know what they are, but they're going to happen. So you better have thought through some of those things. Like, okay, what am I going to do? Take a simple thing, like you lose electricity for 3 days, right? We have a big ice storm up here in the Northeast, and we lose electricity. What are you going to do? So there are things that you can kind of think through these things, put some plans together, and your plans won't get you through the thing easily, but they'll answer 60, 70% of the questions that come up along the way, which means you can mobilize your workforce because they know what they need to do, because you have some processes or procedures in place. So I think that's a great way of getting through some of those things quickly. I think the other part that I found interesting was this notion of internships, and he has a workforce problem, and not that he can't hire people. He can't hire people who have the right skills. I mean, because he pays well. That's not an issue. But he has to find machinists and people who are computer literate, right? So the old traditional person sitting at a lathe, turning the handles on it to machine out a part is different, right? This is a computer controlled device these days, and you have to understand how programming languages and all this kind of stuff. So it's highly skilled. And what he's done there is he's bites the bullet and says, okay, I'm willing to take you if you're a great person and you demonstrate some initiative and some hard work ethic. I'm willing to pay for your training to get you trained to bring this skill to bear. So I think sort of his whole notion of understanding that he just can't go out and hire his workforce. He has to hire good people, and then he has to train them, which sort of is different than what I think most companies' approaches, right? Most companies' approaches, okay, I'm looking for a person with skill XYZ. I'll just go find it someplace in the marketplace. And David says, you know what? I'm going to find good people with good attitudes, good work ethic, and we'll get them trained. And then I think, we've shown a commitment to them, and I think they'll show a commitment back to us. And in the long run, that's going to be really good for both of us, for both the business and for that individual. So I thought that was another interesting piece. And the third one that kind of struck me was this notion of partnering with others to supplement your capacity and capabilities, right? This notion of, gosh, there's all these other small little machine shops out there, and they have great capacity, they have great skills. And is there a way for me to sort of partner with them so that it supplements the capabilities and capacity that I have, that then I can sell to my customers? So those were the three kind of big key takeaways to me. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, I agree. And just to build on your third point, it also helps create a resilient network, because he's helping these small machine shops because he's got the sales and marketing force, and he can bring in more complicated pieces of business that they could bring in by themselves. So it's almost like, instead of making an acquisition, he creates this virtual network, and
Right.
He has a bigger footprint than his asset base actually is. And it's a win-win for the whole region. And he focuses on the region, which I thought was great. Yeah, I mean, I think you can even go back, because I think there's a really important lesson here for all entrepreneurs, not even the ones only in manufacturing, but in almost every field. Again, I think I mentioned this in the last episode. He found a niche. He built a competitive advantage where he could do something in this niche better than his rivals could, and then he scaled that niche up. He leveraged it into the ability to grow into more customers and more assets, more employees. And I think it might be worth going through those, because I think there's only really 3 or 4 of those. That's just a great takeaway. That's textbook entrepreneurship, and he did it. Yeah. What do you think?
Yes, he did. Yeah. So go through them, Mike. What are they?
So I think the first one was,
You're the professor.
Well, you're the retired professor. I'm the currently employed professor, but I'm looking forward to retirement. I'll tell you that right now, Bela. I'm jealous. But I think the first one that I've heard him talk about, and he talked about this one too, if you go back to episode 2, is having a unique value proposition, having something that you do that makes you unique. Leverage that value proposition. And what I mean is, like, why would you go to P2? What do they do, right, that other competitors maybe don't do or won't do or can't do? And you have something that's unique and that people are willing to pay for. The second is, do that so well that it becomes a competitive advantage, that you're locked into saying, yeah, we have the skills, we have the machines, we have the people, we have the logistics capability to do whatever it is that you're doing, whether it's making parts for submarines or making hamburgers, right? That we can do this in a way that's repeatable, that's valuable, that gives customers satisfaction. They believe that whatever they're paying for it, they got a pretty good deal, right? That, yeah, I might have paid more for this, but it's worth it, and I'll come back again. That's the essence of having a value proposition, and a competitive advantage is that you can deliver this time and time again. Okay. He talked about staying in your lane, right? Knowing what your core areas are and sticking to that. We've gone through ups and downs of diversification, right? This word meaning, I'm going to get into these different businesses and try to diversify more my portfolio to reduce my risk. And time again, we've learned through history that a little bit of that is okay, but mainly you do need to stay in your lane and do what you know well and stick to it. So he did that really well. And then, the third point I think that I heard him say, and again, we've heard him say this a couple of times, is the importance of your team, of attracting and selecting the right people. And you already mentioned about the characteristics that he hires for. But with them, share information, be open, try to anticipate their needs, incentivize them to do the things that you need them to do for your business, and then reward them for it. And like you said, he pays well and he treats his employees well. And he talked about sharing profits with his team, right, with inflation and things like this. He does this. And then the fourth thing I love when he talks about this, because, this is something that at least is one of the reasons I do what I do, is he reads a lot. And he's always learning. And I think that, in academics, this is what we kind of do, right? And it's viewed as kind of a bad thing, but I think that it's a really good thing. And I think people in industry need to do it too, is keep up with what's going on, learn what's coming around the corner. Like right now, the buzz is Chat GPT, right? Is all this artificial intelligence stuff. And I'm thrilled. I'm 55 years old and I'm learning about all this stuff and I'm figuring out how it works. And I'm excited to learn, even though it's a threat to my job in some ways, but you always got to kind of keep on top of your game, and you always have to have the knowledge to have conversations and ask questions. And I've got all kinds of experts around here. I'm not an expert, but I know, hey, I can ask good questions, right? And David's the kind of guy, I think, that he's an avid reader, like he said, and he's always up on the latest, and he always has interesting ideas, and you want to learn with him, right? He engages people, and I think this is one element of being a great leader. So I think that understanding the unique value proposition, leveraging that into competitive advantage by staying in your lane, have a great team that can help you execute it, and then read and learn to be a great leader, so that you're always kind of on top of your game. Those are, I think, the four things that I think every entrepreneur, no matter what field you're in and what your goals are, can take away with as a kind of a cool general roadmap to success. What do you think?
Right. It's great points there, Mike. So, I've known David for a long time, and there's a couple of key things I want to sort of reinforce of what you said. So one thing, this notion of understanding what you do really, really well. And I will tell you in the past that Dave has wandered away from his core business on occasions and tried to do other things related, but other sort of endeavors. And I think he has learned the hard way that the greatest value of his time is focusing and staying within what he does at P1. That gives him the greatest return, so to speak, on his time, his energy, and everything. Because every time he's wandered away a little bit, two things have happened. One is P1 has suffered a little bit because he's not paying 100% attention to it. And the other endeavor maybe looked good in the beginning, but it really didn't turn out that well. So I think this notion of figuring out what you do really well, figuring out your value proposition and focusing on it and staying there is really, really good. The other comment I'll make is you have to remember, so this notion of service, right? Meeting your delivery times, providing a quality product for a reasonable price, and servicing your customer really well. So when a customer buys something from you, they're taking a risk, right? Because the thing they're buying from you is maybe going as a component of a bigger project, or maybe it's something that an end user is going to put on their fireplace mantle, and they've told their partner about it and they're all excited, right? And if you're late or the product doesn't meet its quality, you've just embarrassed that person, right? And they will not forget that, right? And I used to build a bunch of stuff in my engineering career, right, when I worked in the corporate world, and I'd order parts from a bunch of different suppliers, and sometimes those parts would be late. They'd promise me something, but it'd come in 3-4 weeks late. Well, that would make my whole project late, right? And then I had to explain that to my boss, right? Or to my customer, and that causes me headaches. So the notion is, don't cause your customer headaches. Don't make a situation where your customer has to explain something, whether to be to their partner in life or whether to be their boss or whatever. So this notion of sort of, providing a high level of service across all of those service dimensions is so much more important than going to somebody and say, well, I saved $50. Well, if you save $50, but it doesn't work or it's late, that $50 is meaningless, right? So I think that's another kind of key takeaway.
Totally agree, Bela. All right, you had the last word. I like it. I think it's time to wrap this up. Listeners, thanks for joining us today. We hope you found both the last two episodes with David Dussault interesting and thought-provoking. And as always, if you have questions about what we've discussed, guests to suggest, new ideas, I don't know, whatever it is you have on your mind, well, not anything, but anything reasonable, please get in touch with us. Our email is bela.and.mike @gmail.com.
And please do hit that follow button on your podcasting app. So until next time, signing off from upstate New York. See you soon, Mike.
And from over here in Münster, Germany, Bela, auf Wiedersehen.